Hi, welcome to Globe Tech Week. My name is Shirley Leung. I'm a business columnist with the Boston Globe, and I'm moderating a panel today on the future of equity in the age of AI. These days, it seems like everyone is talking about the next generation of artificial intelligence, bracing for how it's going to transform the world, much in the way the internet pretty much changed everything. But there are really concerns about how powerful this technology is and how it needs to be rolled out thoughtfully. And those concerns are even being raised by the industry itself. Just yesterday we saw OpenAI's Sam Altman testifying before Congress, um, and um, and he was asking for regulation. You don't hear that a lot from business leaders. And he told Congress, quote, "I think if this technology goes wrong, it can go quite wrong." So he himself was calling for a thoughtful rollout of this next generation of AI. At the Globe, I spent a lot of time writing about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And like many others in this space, I'm worried about how AI can create a society that is, that is going to be less inclusive than today's, and we don't want that to happen. And so I'm very excited to bring together three experts on how AI systems can be designed with equity in mind. Each looks at this issue from a different vantage point: a tech entrepreneur, a policy leader, and a medical doctor. Now, I'm not going to be the only one asking questions today. We're going, I want invite all of you to ask questions as well. And we've already had some really great pre-submitted questions. But if anyone wants to ask questions during the conversation, please use your Q&A function during the Zoom. The chat function has been turned off, so submit questions through Q&A, and we'll try to get them to the panelists in the second half of today's panel. So at this point, I'm going to ask our panelists to turn on your cameras. Oh, here we go. Yay, our technology is working today. Hi, everyone. So I'm going to do quick bios. We have Rana, Dr. Rana El-Kaloubi. She's a scientist, entrepreneur, and angel investor. Maybe you could do a little wave, Rana. She's the co-founder of Affectiva, and it's an AI company spun out of MIT that is a leader in bringing emotional intelligence to our digital experiences. She's going to explain that a little bit later. But Rana has been recognized on Fortune's under 40 list of Forbes' top 50 women in tech and the Boston Globe's Tech Power Players list. So yay, thank you, Rana. And then we have Miriam Vogel. I believe you're joining us from, is it DC? Is that where you are, DC? She's the CEO of Equal AI. It's a nonprofit that works with business leaders, academics, and lawmakers to promote responsible AI governance and reduce unconscious bias in AI systems. She's also the chair of the National Artificial Intelligence Advisory Committee. It's called, or for short, it's called, I think, NIAC. This is a committee that Congress created last year to provide recommendations on AI. And Miriam also co-hosts a podcast called In AI We Trust. So Miriam, welcome back. I think you also spent a stint in Boston too at Dana-Farber. So thank you for joining us here. And then we have Dr. Jorge Rodriguez. He's a physician researcher at Brigham Women's Hospital and an instructor in medicine at Harvard Medical School. His research focuses on achieving digital health equity. He not only practices medicine, but also codes. And he sees himself focused on work at the intersection of medicine, social justice, and technology. So welcome, everyone. Thank you for attending this very timely session, especially after Altman's testimony yesterday on Congress. So a lot of us are just wrapping our arms around the impact of AI. But Rana, you spent a couple of decades understanding this relationship between computers and humans. And I was wondering if you could just talk about what drew you initially to this field of AI, specifically this idea of bringing emotional intelligence to our devices and digital experiences.
Thank you, Shirley, and hi, everybody. So excited to be here with you all today. Yeah, it's a very exciting time to be in the AI space. I've been doing this for the last 23 years. I did my PhD back in the day in computer vision and machine learning at Cambridge University before coming to MIT. So I've been doing this for a lot of years. What struck me initially, and it's still true today, is the human machine interface is really important, and it doesn't just impact our relationship with technology, but ultimately it affects our relationship with each other and how we connect and communicate, because a lot of our interactions are mediated digitally. And when I dove into like, what does intelligence look like in humans? It's not just your IQ, your cognitive intelligence that matters. We all know from our personal experiences that your EQ, your emotional intelligence, your emotional quotient matters just as much. People who have higher EQs tend to be more empathetic. They're better leaders. They can persuade people to motivate behavior change. And so it struck me that as we build AI, and AI with general intelligence, we have to build emotional intelligence into these devices. And so I've spent the last 20 years literally trying to build EQ into our machines by allowing machines to capture like our facial expressions, our vocal intonations, our body postures and gestures. And there's a lot of applications of that technology, but it also poses a lot of questions around what makes us uniquely human. And, you know, if ChatGPT is going to have empathy too, then how are you going to tell, you know, humans versus machines apart? And but it's an exciting time to be in the space.
Mm-hmm. Great. And we're going to hear more about, hear more thoughts from you. So Miriam, I want to go to you because you're a lawyer by training. And 5 years ago, when most of us had never even heard of ChatGPT, you became the CEO of Equal AI. And the work of your nonprofit and, you know, with a focus on responsible AI governance, even it seems to be all the rage today. So what were you and the founders of Equal AI, you know, why were you out front on this topic? What did you see?
Fortunately, the founders, I can't take credit, Ariana Huffington, Rob Lacasio from LivePerson and others saw this coming. They saw biases and other harms that were being embedded in the AI technologies that we were starting to really rely on it as a society, that companies were more and more using AI to help make decisions that are really pivotal, and had this bias towards the technology that it was neutral and scientific and therefore right. And so, you know, we saw them starting to use it with criminal justice technology cases, and where you have people's lives, where communities are so deeply impacted, and then in hiring decisions where you decide whether someone has the opportunity to join the workforce in an impactful way, or whether they and their family are denied that opportunity. And so they fortunately started Equal AI, and they tapped me to join with a bit of an unconventional background, because my background is, as you said, law and policy. And so I had worked in the tech space as a lawyer and understood how lawyers, lawmakers, policymakers need to be a partner in helping to navigate the safety and inclusivity of this technology, like all other technologies. And it also worked on policy reducing bias. So when I was at the White House, I had the privilege to help lead the president's Equal Pay Task Force and looked at bias in the workplace. And then under Sally Yates at the Department of Justice, she wanted to create implicit bias training for federal law enforcement, because she saw the through line there of bias in different medium as presenting in different ways with different root causes. And likewise, the founders at Equal AI saw this was a same age-old issue in a new medium with bias in artificial intelligence. And then when we started to realize is that dealing with bias in AI requires responsible AI governance. And when you do it, the upside is you're not only reducing harms, you're creating a better product and reducing other risks and harms, cyber intrusions and other problems that are embedding in AI if we're not vigilant. So I would say, like any good final exam, you know, we've been preparing for 5 years now. We're lucky we had some time to really get our hands dirty and work with companies to understand how they're using AI, where the problems emerge. And this use case, you know, presented some of the elements that we were expecting and some new ones. Part of it, frankly, is the enthusiasm for AI, which we had seen growing and now, obviously growing to exponential levels, which is exciting. But the good news is that we and many others, like those of us here on the talk today and elsewhere around the world, have started to think about ways that this can be handled responsibly.
Mhm. And Jorge, for you, I'm curious about when you started to think about digital health equity. And, was this a concern before the pandemic or only really rose to the forefront with the surge in telehealth during the pandemic?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'd say that, I think the broader idea of digital equity, right, like it just extends throughout history, right? Every time a new technology has come up, we've sort of had to face this question of, how will these new technologies reach all populations? Specifically, how will they impact marginalized populations? I think for me, in the context of health, it started off pretty simply. One day I was working with a patient and I went to go on the hospital I was working to's website, and I was like, it was a Spanish speaking patient. I was like, oh, let's find it on the website. And I went on the website and the website was in English only. I was like, how is this patient going to possibly be able to navigate an increasingly digital healthcare system if even the website is not like accessible to them? And so that got me sort of thinking all about all the different factors that can lead to digital health equity. And when I talk about digital health equity, I sort of really mean that, the belief that all patients should have a fair and just opportunity to engage with and benefit from these digital health tools, however you define that. And certainly the COVID-19 pandemic kind of made everything evident, right? As we saw the deployment of telehealth, we saw that certain populations were able to access this and certainly certain populations weren't. But this wasn't new, right? If you look back to like the HITECH Act, for example, in 2009, is really what got patient portals to expand. Patient portals as the main patient-facing tools that a lot of healthcare systems have. But even, shortly thereafter, if you look at least at some of the papers that came out at the time, I think in like 2010, like a year later, you already saw like these evidence of disparities in access to this technology. And since then, there's been like over 100 papers that show the same thing over and over and over again. And so I think the COVID-19 pandemic certainly like made it evident, but I think the idea of like digital health equity and having patients have access to these tools has really been around for quite some time. I think the thinking, or my understanding of the thinking of the healthcare system had been like, well, we have some time to get there. We'll slowly kind of solve the issue over time. And then the pandemic hit and then we didn't have time to solve the issue. So I think, as we kind of sit here and have these discussions, I think it's great to kind of hear people thinking about this early on to try to learn from those challenges that we learned from other, types of technology that have been deployed at healthcare to make sure that we don't kind of repeat that thing. So like, years from now, we have hundreds and hundreds of papers showing sort of disparities and biases kind of propagated by these AI systems. That I think that's not where we want to get to.
So Jorge, how many different languages are available now on hospital, or I don't know, your hospital website or whatever system you were on? Is it better?
It is better. So now at the hospital system I work at, we took the top 6 languages that our patients speak, and at least the portal is available in those top 6 languages. So I think folks have kind of learned from that. I can't say that's sort of like the standard across the board, but I think there's more kind of like understanding and recognition of like these kind of small pieces that I think make a big difference in the way we kind of deploy and then evaluate health technology.
Yeah.
I think, Shirley, if I can add on, I think what is truly fascinating about AI in particular is because it's moving so fast, it's almost like exasperating the biases that exist in society already, right? It's like, it's not new, but we amplify it and we deploy it exponentially, all these technologies. And now, a little bit of bias that existed in this part of the world is now just like massive. And so that's where I think a lot of the risk is coming in.
And, let's stay on that topic of the fast-paced growth of AI. I mean, how do we keep up? I guess, how do we keep up? How do we develop systems fast enough to reduce the bias, in writing a lot about diversity and equity, I can't help but feel pessimistic because, change is really slow in tech. Tech is, I mean, how long have we been talking about how white male dominated tech is, how the investors are white and male, and the developers and the people who lead the companies. So how do we break this cycle of unconscious bias, especially if AI is just taking off at this exponential pace?
Well, I'm happy to jump in and say, I think the nice thing here is we actually cannot win as a country, democracy, AI, unless we do a better job. So I love that our inclusion, our humanity kind of depends on the fact that we bring in more voices, more vantage points. The way we see it is that bias and other harms embed at each human touch point throughout the AI lifecycle. And so if you do not have more eyes, more thoughts, understanding where these biases and other threats are emerging, you can't, whether it's in the first stage of deciding what AI will be built, what the solution is. I mean, it's a unique subset of our population. ChatGPT and other large language models may change that, but to date, it's historically been a privileged group that can decide whether you have an AI solution to a problem. So you're already going to have some biases in what the AI solutions are. And then you add on top of it throughout the design, the development, the testing. We know there's so many biases in the data because, as Rana already touched on, it's a reflection of our society. And so we are reflecting and magnifying and scaling past biases and other problems. But each human touch point is also an opportunity to identify and remedy those harms. So part of the problem is, like they always say, just accepting the problem, realizing it's a problem. If we understand that these biases are not only wrong, but harmful to the end product, it incentivizes companies to ensure that they do their best to bring on more perspectives so that by the time the AI product goes to market, first of all, they have a broader consumer base because it's better AI for a broader population. And there's less liability. There's more laws that are going to be applied that are currently on the books. It's not just a matter of new regulation. A lot of the AI is violating laws currently on the books across the globe, in addition to all the regulation coming. And so I think whether you're jumping in here because you want to do the right thing or you don't want to be on the front page of the Boston Globe for having done the wrong thing, we have enough incentives aligned to make sure that people are starting to diversify in order to reduce their risk and liability.
And can I share the kind of the investor entrepreneur perspective too? I've now made about 33 investments in AI first or AI driven companies. And I will literally call out the founding teams if it is non-diverse, which often it is, right? And I'll say, oh, have you thought about diversity on your team? Have you thought about how inclusive is this technology? How are you mitigating bias? Have you thought about like your machine learning pipeline and where the data is coming from? And if you think about bias, and if the answer is no, I will often say, well, I don't think we're a good match, but I will also encourage these teams to think about that. So I think the investor community needs to also value equity, diversity, bias in how they evaluate these AI opportunities as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I'll add that just to kind of thinking a lot of the work I think that's being done in academia, medical and science education at the NIH with kind of their funding efforts to diversify, I think is so critical, right? Because a lot of the reason we may have gotten here where you have this kind of lack of diversity as team is because you're starting from a point where people from marginalized communities are struggling as they kind of go through each step of the early education to higher education to the kind of the next level of getting jobs. So I think a lot of the work that's being done to look at, the role of standardized testing and sort of like medical and science education, to look at, like, as I mentioned, the NIH and how they're funding different efforts. So I think a lot of that work can also help to support. I love to see when companies kind of go back and try to work with communities and say, like, here, we're funding, a STEM education program, because I think that sort of really gets us in the long-term commitment so that at the end, we can sort of build these, very diverse multidisciplinary teams. I look through a lot of the work that's being done there as a kind of a key point to kind of make sure that in the future we're in a good spot.
Mm-hmm. I want to go back to this idea of whether we need whether existing rules or regulations or laws can reduce bias and offer protections, or do we need new laws? And I think one of the things that emerged out of Sam Altman's testimony yesterday before Congress was, do we need a new federal bureau of AI? I guess instead of the FBI, do we need a FBAI? I guess, or maybe we need something on a global scale. So, Miriam, I was wondering if you could kind of put on your NIAC hat, what did you make of Altman's testimony, and the kind of unusual call for more regulation?
Yeah. Well, I can't speak on behalf of NIAC on the testimony yesterday. For those who are not familiar, NIAC is a group of 26 individuals who are appointed to a federal advisory committee to advise the president and White House on AI policy. We just had a report that was publicized, but is on track to being officially delivered to the president and thus final as we speak. So in the next week, we should have a report to speak about. It is currently published, and so but it's based on our work on the past year, and so it certainly would not speak to the testimony yesterday. However, one of our members, Christina Montgomery, was one of the panelists yesterday at the hearing, and so for my Equal AI hat, what I can say is it doesn't surprise me that industry is asking for regulation here. I think when done right, regulation and laws are intended to be the partner for industry. It's really up to us in civil society, government, to decide what is fair, what is acceptable, what is not acceptable. The companies are doing their job, they're innovating and they're creating new opportunities, and it's up to us to say, well, are these opportunities inclusive? Who's not being seen and heard? And so I think that it's great that they are taking a responsible perspective, and I think it's great from what I saw yesterday. It's in line with what we've been seeing with different policymakers from Equal AI. We do a lot of work with companies, but we also work with policymakers who are trying to navigate what the right guardrails should be right now. And I've really taken heart to the fact that they understand that they have not delivered in the times that they've needed to in the past, most recently with technology, whether it's privacy, social media, understanding the internet. And I see a lot of members and their staffs where everyone knows a lot of the work is really rooted, taking the time to educate themselves and get smart quickly. I've also seen that across the executive branch. And if you look at the FTC, they were out years ago, talking about, it was 2019 perhaps, where they first started talking about the fact that they intend to regulate behavior under their purview in AI systems, meaning if you are proclaiming your AI system is doing more than it can, if you're not testing for bias and harms, you're in violation of different laws under their purview. We saw after that, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission start their own initiative where they said, we have many civil rights laws under our purview in the employment space, and take notice, just because an AI system is making recommendations does not get you off the hook. You're equally liable, no matter whether your recommendation is by human machine or human machine combination. They also had a joint historic statement, first of its kind, with DOJ last year, saying not only that, but doubling down and saying there are specific laws we'll point out to you that are specifically applicable in the AI space. And the one they talked about was the Americans with Disabilities Act, the ADA, which many AI systems could be in violation of, because, we've seen the problems with facial recognition, how when it simply does not see some of its users. Well, voice recognition can be even more fraught with biases and other challenges in identifying speech. So if you are, we had an AI summit with Equal AI last week, and we couldn't use AI to transcribe some of the conversations because it could not hear the females who participated, and we have a majority female program, so that was deeply problematic for us. Now, if you're talking about people with different dialects, most AI programs are trained on English, other than those that Dr. Rodriguez is solving for. And on top of that, if you have a speech impediment, it is hard, if not very unlikely, that the AI program is going to hear you, and thus an ADA violation.
Rana and Jorge, what is as practitioners in tech and medicine, what kind of regulation makes sense in your sector? Jorge, maybe you can jump in on this.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think a lot of this is just going to require deep communication across kind of stakeholders in the healthcare system. I think that not only, I mean, we often think of like clinicians and health IT folks, maybe some of the researchers and AI developers. I think going to communities and communities from marginalized communities is going to be kind of a key point to this, right? Because in the end, a lot in healthcare, a lot of this kind of ends up impacting the patient is sort of where it all ends up. And so having that conversation with patients from those communities to either say simple things like, in the current use cases, like, being used to respond to patient messages, for example, that's being like piloted at kind of multiple healthcare systems. What does it mean when, do you have sort of like transparency where it shows this, this message was responded to by an AI with the support of an artificial intelligence tool? And on the patient side, like, what does that mean? I'm thinking of some of my patients who have lower health literacy or just general literacy. What does artificial intelligence mean? I think we sort of understand it. Some people have different understanding of it, but how do we actually communicate that to patients? And I think those kind of conversations and that kind of like regulation piece of it, those kind of questions only come up by having these conversations with folks on the front lines, patients, to kind of say like, and sort of brings me, I guess, to my main point around like having patients be more involved as part of these like regulation discussions so that they can guide those questions and have those assessments. Because some of the ones it's tricky. I was having a conversation with a patient the other day, and it was just kind of like, just a natural conversation. And I was just curious, and I was like, oh, what do you make of like artificial intelligence or machine learning? And they were just like, what is that? Like no sense of it. And it's just a matter of like, well, we're on the flip side, we're like deploying these tools, like how we're going to do all these things. But I think if we miss that gap, I think it's going to be a big gap in kind of the regulation of the policies. I think having input from either patients themselves or kind of folks that represent patients, I think is going to be a key point to this going forward.
Mm-hmm. Rana, what would you like to see I mean, do you want more regulation?
Yeah, I think there absolutely has to be more thoughtful regulation, is what I call it. So regulation that with an understanding of how these technologies work and where it can go wrong. In my space, a lot of it has to do with bias. We've already talked about that, for example, in facial recognition systems, but also privacy. So we as a company, and I'm very vocal about that, we've steered completely away from applications of emotion AI that are surveillance-like applications or lie detectors, or deployed in public spaces where people don't have the opportunity to consent, or don't even know that the technology is there. I think that is not acceptable. So we only entertain applications where the person has an opportunity to say, yep, I understand that I'm giving up this very personal data, and I understand the value I'm getting in return for that. And I think the only way to get there, because technology is moving so fast, is you need this very close partnership between government and lawmakers and tech entrepreneurs, right? Like, we need the entire ecosystem. I've been Miriam, I don't know if you know the Partnership on AI Consortium. So I was part of that for many years. It's a multi-stakeholder consortium. It was started by the tech giants in partnership with Amnesty International and ACLU and other civil liberty organizations, as well as a number of startups. And we would all come together around the table and kind of debate some of these issues and try to come up with guidelines or best practices. And I remember when I first started having these meetings, it was the first time I would be in the same space with ACLU or Amnesty. It's not the typical kind of crowd that tech entrepreneurs hang out with, but we need more of these multi-stakeholder environments and spaces to make progress.
Mm-hmm. And we heard from Rana earlier about how you as an investor, right, are pushing, companies and asking, companies, how diverse are your teams? Are you thinking of, are you doing anything to reduce bias? And so, Miriam, I think on your podcast, you've talked to, you kind of highlight companies that do employ, AI in a equitable way. I mean, it's not like the companies are already thinking about this, right? And I think you talk about how the companies that are thinking about how to deploy AI responsibly, that's going to become a competitive advantage. So you can talk about that a little bit. Some of the, highlight some of the companies that have figured this out, I guess, or and should be kind of put on a pedestal, at least for now.
Yes. Well, thank you for listening. We do have the privilege at Equal AI and on our podcast to work with companies that are in this for the right reasons. Some of them don't want to be on the podcast. Some of them don't want to talk about their work. They just want to do it. They want to figure out what it means. And the hard thing with AI is it's never one and done. You can't put in your framework for responsible AI governance and walk away and let it play itself out, because it'll play itself out into a nightmare scenario. It's something that requires constant attention, because AI will continue to iterate, learn new patterns, create new risks. And so those companies we're privileged to work with are thinking about best practices. I mentioned a summit we had last week where we got to bring with both industry and policymakers together. And on our podcast, we also get to feature policymakers and other thought leaders. We had Representative Don Beyer, who's also on our podcast, who, to his credit, he's in Congress, he's busy, he's in his 70s, and he's going back to get a computer science degree. So
wow.
Yeah, that's what he does at nights, other than preparing for hearings and responding to constituent outreach. And so, if he can do it, what's the rest of our excuse? And so, I say that because in comparison, it makes what companies are doing almost seem easier, because it is within their lane. We really talk about responsible AI governance because it's in every company's best interest and mandate to act responsibly. So what does that mean? A lot of the companies we work with have aligned on some best practices, and we bring in AI industry leaders and academics and thought leaders so that we as a group, until we have national and international standards, we sympathize. I'm a former general counsel, and I can imagine, and I work with companies, it's very challenging to know what's the right thing to do right now. There's no safe recourse of saying we're following the AI law, because there's not the AI law. And even if you're following a certain law of a certain jurisdiction, well, you've got, AI has no boundaries, and so there's no prevailing jurisdiction. But fortunately, there are best practices. I like to refer to them as good AI hygiene. And I think there's 5 basic things that we see across the companies that we work with who are committed to doing this work well, whether they are an AI creation company or an AI or company using AI in pivotal ways. So they plan their policy, they have a framework in place. We're very fortunate that today, in this point in time, we have really good frameworks out there, some put out by industry, some by government. People don't think necessarily of Congress as being up to speed on technology. Well, over 3 years ago, they created legislation that mandated that that NIST, the National Institute of Standard and Technology, this small but mighty organization in commerce, create a risk management framework for AI. So it's out there, it's public for everyone to use. And at Equal AI, we are so thrilled that they've done this job and so capably that we, on our website, anyone can see on equalai.org, we created an impact assessment tool. Because this is another best practice to do an assessment of your pivotal AI systems and look at where some of the risks, liabilities, concerns, again, cyber bias and otherwise. So you plan your framework, you ensure there's accountability. You have to have someone like Rana at the head of your team, the C-suite, who is holding you accountable and who will make sure that this is happening and make sure that it's safe. Because, we've seen at too many companies where an employee will raise a problem and it's not well heard. So having accountability in the C-suite makes it safe. It makes your employees your teammates and understanding where these biases and other risks can emerge. And then you standardize that practice. You make sure that across enterprise, whether it's a small company or large, everyone's clear on what the AI principles are and how they're operationalized within the company, who has responsibility for which pieces of it. You want to make sure, fourth, that you're documenting what you're testing for, because AI will touch so many hands within your own company, but then with all the others who are using the AI, whether it's your consumers or others down the road who are acquiring your AI. So you want to be very explicit about what you've tested and when, who has not yet been seen. And so you might not be able to say all the people who haven't been seen by your AI system, but by being careful about, with your cancer screening detection, it's great that it has 88% success rate, but for whom is that success rate, so that others down the road, so that Dr. Rodriguez's colleagues will know, he will probably know because he'll have read the data cards, but for those that are less familiar with the data cards, the model cards, the transparency assets, they'll know who has not been seen or tested effectively for that success rate that is so impressive. And then finally, audit. Again, because AI will continually iterate, you need to make sure that you're constantly auditing your AI systems to see where they're going awry.
Great. I also was struck by how, we have this impression that AI is in the future, but it's in the present, right? and so it's going to get evolve even more faster, it seems like, right? And so more companies actually have to kind of start thinking about this. So before we I'm encouraging the audience to ask questions. I have some pre-submitted questions, and I'm going to start with one of them right now. So this is, bear with me, this is a little long question, but it's a good one. So human connections are vital to society, and companies might think AI is a solution in a fast-paced work environment with limited staffing. But what can companies do to minimize substituting AI for handling real and complex issues? This is the idea is who's going to provide oversight, write policies to ensure fair and equitable treatment. Will there be, will there be a requirement to take implicit bias training on an annual basis for the people writing the algorithms? Who's going to monitor this? I know that it seems like right now it's kind of, it's self-directed, right? But should it, and I guess, Miriam, you talked about how there are existing laws, right, that protect against bias, but like, how do we make sure that some of the stuff that's maybe hard to understand or grasp, like, becomes a priority in companies or in organizations?
I think there needs to be an ethics board or a chief ethics officer, and honestly, not just AI companies, because very soon every company is going to be an AI company in the same way that every company became an internet company or a web company. So I think there needs to be an ethics supervisory board that oversees some of that and also bridges the gap between what's happening at the company and what's happening in the world, right? Because there is a lot of policies coming out and sometimes people are not aware of them. So I think that's one way to address it. And then maybe this is a hopeful message. We have to remember that at the end of the day, AI is just a tool. It's just a technology that's at the tip of our hands, and it's up to us how we use it. I think because AI is taking on a lot of roles that were traditionally done by humans, it allows us to focus on these core human connections and creativity and ingenuity and empathy and all these things that we really value as humans. I think we have an opportunity to fall back to that and reprioritize that. But I also think it's an amazing opportunity for everybody to lean in, because some of these technologies are new for all of us. And so, sign up, try them out, become an expert in them, because I think humans plus AI will be better than humans alone. So I think to kind of bridge the equity gap, I think.
So do you think, when I think about, I don't know, I guess I haven't followed technology that closely, but it's not like anyone asked me, here, try the internet before we roll it out. But it seems like that's what's happening with ChatGPT, that all of us were invited to play around with it. And that's kind of new, right?
Right. And cool in a way, right? Because we can all play with it and uncover where it's biased, but also kind of innovate on new use cases and applications. So it's, in a way, it could potentially level the playing field. And even if it doesn't, the folks who have access to these tools are going to do better than those who don't. And so use the opportunity, like lean in.
Yeah. And Jorge and Miriam, I'm curious, so much of the discussion about AI, it's this is a transformative moment. We need to take advantage of it, or well, AI, it's a threat to human existence. It's going to be the end of humans as we know it. And so, I'm curious, where do you, what's your sense? And then we also know that there was a group of scientists and Elon Musk. They recently asked to hit the pause button on training kind of the most powerful AI. Asking the labs to kind of stop to hit the pause button, right, on training new AI, a new generation of AI. So where do you guys fall in that? This idea of, is changing the world, or is it going to, a threat to humans, I guess?
I was going to say, Miriam, thank you for letting me go. And I was going to say, I think for me, it just goes back to to the use case, right? I think as Rana was mentioning, it's a tool. So I think if we step back, at least in the health equity work, and we say, what are the drivers of health equity? You have this whole conversation going around it's social and structural determinants of health. That's sort of like the big conversation there. So if you take a step back and say, okay, those are the drivers of health inequities and health disparities, where does AI fit in that, right? If we start tackling issues, food insecurity, housing instability, where does AI fit in that? And I think those are the questions that we can work together to try to answer it, and that'll determine, I think, how transformative they can be, at least in kind of the health equity space. And I think the other kind of two small points I'll make is one, I think even more so, I think the pandemic brought it up, but even more so a larger conversation around digital literacy and being able to interact with these tools. I think it's a big kind of conversation that I think is a piece of this. And I think the other thing is I think for the human connection piece, not underestimating the role of the human connection and how much people value that. I was having a conversation with a patient about telehealth, and they were telling me, and they could list all the benefits of telehealth. Oh, I save on time, I save on parking, I can do it from home, I can do it from work. And then at the end, I asked them well, next time you have a visit, if they offered you a telehealth visit, would you take it? And they're like, oh gosh, no, I love going in to see my doctor. I loved having that connection. So it was such a funny moment of the technology benefits were so clear to them, but even so, there was something about that human connection, being able to shake the hand and do all these things that I think I don't know, it just, for me, it was kind of a moment. I was oh, wow, okay, this is a sort of another huge component that we really have to take into account. So, yeah.
And I guess if I was asked, as we were, is it going to help society? Is it an existential threat in some ways? My answer is yes. And to pull that thread a little bit more, at Equal AI, we are AI net positive. I am excited for the ways that AI is changing our world. The healthcare space, I want to just hear Dr. Rodriguez for the next few hours on ways that he's using AI, because when used thoughtfully, I was mentioning before we started that Dr. Ziad Obermeyer is a researcher that I often follow because he has presented to us some of the risks of AI. What he did was groundbreaking. He presented one of the few use cases we've seen where bias was detected in an AI system from an outside academic team. And that was with the United Healthcare Optum case, where they saw that AI was delivering recommendations for healthcare solutions in a way that was both racist and classist. So we're going to see this more and more, where outside auditors and researchers are identifying these harms. And that's why I take comfort in the fact that things will get better, because there's going to be more and more people making sure that that is the case. But he also does research on the flip side. He uses the knowledge that bias is embedded in our healthcare system in many, if not all systems, and has understood that knee pain in patients of color has been underdiagnosed and undertreated, which leads to huge problems, whether it's calling out sick, pain, less healthcare solutions, surgeries that could help people participate in the workforce, participate in their lives and their families. And so they created an AI tool that started with the patient instead of historical trends and systems. And they created an AI tool that is 2 times better at identifying knee pain in patients of color, and all patients are benefited by this tool as well. So given the ways that we're using AI in pivotal ways, it is deeply dangerous if people are not on notice that they could be scaling past discrimination and undoing progress within lines of code that they might not even be able to read. But I am gratified, and I take optimism from the fact that we're all here talking about it. We understand, everyone listening here today is now on notice that they can't accept something as an answer as true because it came from an AI system. They need to interrogate it. And when ChatGPT or any other LLM system tells them, here's your diagnosis, they will know to take it to a human. So like Rana said, that human machine interplay will make us smarter, faster, better, if we're on notice that it is a tool and could be a weapon if not used properly.
Mm-hmm. All right, I know we're running up against our time here, but let me ask one more question for the audience and then we'll wrap. Rana, I think this question might be good for you. There was a question about how might AI assist folks with intellectual and development disabilities, particularly in the workplace?
Yeah, we did. I got my start actually working with individuals on the autism spectrum who struggle with nonverbal communication. And so one way AI could help with that is act as an assistive device that helps interpret these nonverbal signals and help these individuals interpret some of these signals. But also on the flip side, I think it's an opportunity to deploy some of these tools to help kind of what's called neurotypicals actually also understand how people who are neurodiverse perhaps have different facial expressions or are very uncomfortable making eye contact. So I think the opportunity goes both ways. And in general, back to the diversity conversation, we need diverse brains around the table. Individuals on the autism spectrum, for example, tend to be amazing pattern recognizers. And so that's excellent. You know, there are a whole new slew of job opportunities around data acquisition, data annotation, data cleansing, which would be incredible for this population in particular. So I think AI creates a lot of like new opportunities for people with diverse brains and minds. We should take advantage of that.
All right, one last question and then we'll wrap. So this is like lightning round. So so imagine we're a decade in the future, it's 2033, you know, if we as a society have rolled out, you know, AI equitably and thoughtfully, what does our world look like? Maybe you can just like paint a crisp picture for us from your vantage point. Miriam, why don't you start?
If we do this right, we have more engaged population. We have better education of better quality for everyone, including those who are currently underserved. We have better access to representation because there are more ways at everyone's fingertips to participate, whether it's in the creation of AI design or in their policy solutions. If we do this right, then there won't be such a thing as disability because they're all different abilities that different AI tools can help support and make an ability, make an advantage in some ways. So I think that opportunities are limitless as to all the different ways it can improve. Our health will be improved, our education, our opportunities, if we navigate this appropriately.
Jorge, next.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think for me, it really comes down to, you know, having worked with communities to deploy and kind of maintain AI systems to really address the challenges that they're facing on the day-to-day, and really, for me as a clinician, to really address a lot of I'm an internist, a lot of the chronic diseases that can lead to a lot of the challenges down the line, strokes, heart attacks, and we've really applied it in those kind of early phases of their lives to better their lives and to kind of address a lot of the challenges that they face in managing their diabetes or even the development of diabetes, for example. I think that's where sort of I see sort of as a pie in the sky kind of goal.
Mm-hmm. And Rana, close us out.
I think technology and AI in particular are incredible vehicles for economic, social mobility, but also access to health and wellness and wealth. And so if we do this right, it will be equal access. These opportunities will be equally accessible for all of us. And I think we will be a better society for it.
All right, we're going to do the same panel 10 years from now and see if your predictions are correct. Anyways, I want to thank Miriam, Jorge, and Rana. Thank you. And thank you everybody for joining us today. And think of this as just the beginning, talking about AI and equity and how do we build a more equitable future in this age of AI. Thank you.
Thank you, Shirley. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Shirley.